My full name is Norman Lloyd Mathias, and obviously the Mathias comes from my father's side of the family. The Lloyd comes from my grandparents. My grandmother was called Lily Lloyd. I don't know where Norman came from. It's a name I've had to live with for the last 70 years. Obviously, I think at the time Norman was quite a popular name, and you could probably tell all the Normans in the world are probably around about 70. I was born in 1949 in Llanapia maternity ward, and we resided in Ferndale, which was the home of my parents, Idris and Edwina, known locally as Id and Ed. They were both born in Ferndale, but my mother's family came from Devon, from Barnstable, and my grandmother's side, my father's side, came from Newport in Pembrokeshire. And because at the time, in the turn of the century, the Rhondda was a hub of people coming from all over the world, all over Britain anyway, because of the mining industry. That was the draw, and my father spent his entire life living in Pine Street. It was a house that my grandmother lived in from the time she was born, and my grandfather bought when the house was new. So it passed through 3 generations, really. Well, my mother, Edwina Grace Abbott, good Devon name. She was brought up in a family of 7 children, and there was a distinct difference in the top 3 and the bottom 3. In fact, one of them died along the way, which was sort of par for the course in those days. But the 3 eldest children were virtually teenagers before my mother was born. And then my grandmother became pregnant again after my mother and had twin boys. And the story goes they were both 10-pounders, which is, a significant weight if you just had one child, let alone 2. It really sort of finished my grandmother off, I think, in the sense that she was bedridden for a long period of time afterwards, getting over giving birth to twins. Ken went into the mining industry and became a mining engineer, and met Glenys, who was became his wife, and they went to live out in South Africa. And he hated his time in South Africa. I've got lots of letters he sent home to Edwina, saying that he was counting down the days when he was going to come home. But tragically, he lost his life in a mining accident in his early 20s, or mid-20s, and died of multiple injuries in a colliery in South Africa. So Glenys came back, and she lived with Edwina and Idris in Pine Street for a while. Bereft, obviously, she just lost a new husband, and Ron was equally upset for losing his twin brother. And surprisingly, Glenys and Ron started up an affection for each other, and Glenys ended up marrying Ron, Ken's twin. So she married the two boys. They'd never had any children. Ironically, Ron lived until he was 62, and he was a very clever man, but tragically he got killed in the Royal Mint in an accident when he was 62, just a few years before he was due to retire. So both boys died in industrial accidents. My mother resided in Union Street in Ferndale with the 2 boys, by which time his sisters had flown the nest. And during the war years, my mother went to live with her relatives down in Biddyford, and she became to look upon Gwen and Jean as her sisters. But they met through the church. In fact, they were introduced by my grandmother, Idris's mum, introduced Idris to Edwina. Dad, on the other hand, was the only child, although he was a twin. His twin sister died when within a couple of months of them being born, actually. But he was brought up like a single child, and as a single parent, because his father disappeared without trace for whatever reason when he was quite small. So Idris was brought up by his mother and his grandparents. He had a very poor start to his life, but throughout his life he built up a reputation in the community as a lay preacher, as with his work in the church, in the pantomimes, and producing, directing pantomimes, and being the dame in the pantomimes. Everybody knew Idris and everybody knew Edwina. So as a child, when I grew up in Ferndale, I felt quite special because everybody knew the family. And, you know, I had always had that feeling of being special and being, by having Idris and Edwina as my parents, because I was a sort of like a famous within my community. It was special days having Id and Ed as a mum and dad. And the friendship that I've endeared really to this day from you know, people like Kerry Davis was my best mate. He was friendly with my godfather, my godmother, Uncle Tony, Auntie Vera. Kerry became my best man, and Idris, it never thought about it at the time, actually, but that my father used to dress up in a woman's clothing for pantomimes. I mean, these days he'd be called a cross-dresser or something, but he used to play the part really well, and people used to remark that Idris was a better dame in the pantomime than the pantomimes they used to have in the new theatre. It was, you know, a really good and special quality time. We used to go down to rehearsals. Mum used to spend a lot of her time sewing dresses and sequins on dresses for the chorus girls. I appeared in one pantomime myself, and but I didn't really like the stage and being a star on the stage. But my sister Linda sort of took to it, and music became a very big part of her life. In terms of piano, I had piano lessons on a Saturday morning where all my mates were playing football. So I had to go to music lessons with Miss Jones with this Ponzi-looking music case. And I used to take all the back roads so nobody could see me. I was so embarrassed going to have piano lessons when my mates were playing football. So I didn't really take to playing the piano. And I think Mum and Dad thought it was a good idea for me to stop practicing when I started picking the ivory off the keys. So that was the end of my music career. Living in Ferndale was fantastic as a childhood. Didn't realise at the time, but we had complete freedom to do whatever we want in terms of going up the mountain, making bullwhips, going exploring different places. We could be out all day, but our parents didn't need to worry about us because there was no danger for children in those days. Yeah, it was good. It was good, the place to be brought up. The only time I ever got into trouble was when I was with Kerry, because he was a bit feral, a bit wild. On one occasion, we were a bit bored watching a football match on telly, and Kerry decided it would be a good idea to go up the attic. So we put lots of chairs on the beds and climbed up this little hole in the roof, and discovered that from number 3 North Road, we could go along the roof and follow the roof and around right up to number 50, going around people's attics, because they seemed to be all open, which seemed to work well until on my way back I missed one of the beams and put my foot through the ceiling in number 4. Made a big hole in the ceiling, and but although I did it, Kerry got the blame for it because it was in his house and he was older and he should have known better. But I don't think I really got into any trouble when I was living in Ferndale, because at the end of the day, everybody knew who I was, so I couldn't really get away with being a troublemaker. I think I was reasonably well behaved. I used to go as a family to church 3 times every Sunday. That was my fond memories of being a choir boy and putting the candles out and being part of the church environment. Throughout my childhood, from day I was born until I got married when I was 21, we lived in Pine Street in Ferndale. It was a traditional Rhondda type of terraced home built for miners. It had 4 bedrooms, which was a bit unusual because most of the houses had 3 bedrooms. It had a parlour in the front, which was the front room, a middle room where we lived most of the time, a kitchen, and a scullery, which is like a pantry. But that's the days before we had a fridge. But the pantry scullery ended up being converted into a bathroom, downstairs bathroom. My early days, it was a tin bath in front of a fireplace. So it was pure luxury to have an indoor toilet, an indoor bath. There was quite a large garden, but that garden got virtually halved when Dad got his first car after passing his driving test at 45. He had a Ford Anglia, and the Ford Anglia he wanted a garage for it, so it took up half the garden building a garage at the back of the house. He also had a coal shed because we still had coal fires at that time before the house was fitted with central heating. My mum and dad had the large front bedroom. I was in the middle room at the upstairs, and the back bedroom, a double bedroom, was where my nana Lily was lived. It was effectively her house. She was 30 years older than my father, and my father was 30 years older than me. So when I was born, Lily was like 60, and she died at the age of 84 when I was 24, which was the first bereavement I can ever remember in the family. She was quite a character. She used to love singing. She was a very vain lady, and Dad always used to say, Idris used to say, that Nana will always be alive as long as Linda's around, because Linda's sort of inherited that kind of vanity that Nana had. She used to come down on a Sunday to go to church in the evening, where she'd been upstairs getting ready, and she used to put so much powder on her face, she used to look like a plush nugget. And I don't know, not plush nuggets around now, but she used to be covered in sort of talcum powder, and she used to just stand there and wait for you to say, "You look nice, Nana." She was waiting for that compliment. But she was a lovely lady, and didn't have an easy life because she had to obviously bring up my dad as a single parent with the help of her parents. But I used to go to the cinema with her. She used to take me to on a few occasions. She was had an interest with the WI, the Mothers Union. She was on the committee of the Old Age Pensioners Society. So she was actively involved in the village of Ferndale. Which has special memories, and because it's a very tight-knit community, and everybody who lived around you was your auntie. Everybody was very caring, and you probably these days they would be regarded as being nosy, but you've just felt that you were surrounded by friends. My school as an infant school was in North Road. I recall that I was must have been quite a clingy sort of kid, because I never liked the idea of my mother leaving me there in school. So she always used to wear her apron when she came down to drop me in at school, and she used to tell me a lie. She used to lie to me, which I can't believe, but she used to say that she was in the school all the time, cleaning the school while I was in classes. But in those days, in the afternoon, after you had lunch, or it was dinner then, it wasn't lunch up in the Rhondda. You never had lunch, you had dinner. But in the afternoon, there were beds laid out, small beds where you could go down and have a lie down for an hour to have a sleep. I can remember lying on those beds, not wanting to sleep, but you had to lie on the bed, and sort of for about an hour before you could get up and carry on the rest of your day. I can't remember much more than that in my infant's years. I then went on at when I was probably about 7, down to what they call the lower school, which is the primary junior school, and had a great time there, really, in terms of the class, the teachers we had, and one teacher used to follow you through the whole school, from 7 till 11. Mrs. Evans, from Pontegwaith, and she was a really good teacher. Never had any occasion where I needed to be reprimanded for any misdemeanor. It was an old school, but a very good yard, so we could play football every break. We drew goalposts on the wall, and it was, school doesn't exist any longer. It burned down. But it was good. I had some good mates, and I'm still in touch with some of them now. I tried the 11 plus when I was 10, and I didn't get a place in grammar school, so I went to SecMod. Bit unfortunate in some ways that people who were like a year older than me up to that time had 2 opportunities to pass the 11 plus. But my year was the first year that you had 1 chance. So I'd like to think that I could have got in if I had 2 chances. But it never really affected my scholastic days, because I went to SecMod and I did well there. I was top of the class in most subjects. I learned practical skills like woodworking and metalwork. We had my particular favourite teacher there was the one who did John Broadrib, who was a lovely man, and I think if you relate to the teacher, you always want to do well for them as well as yourself. And the subjects where I didn't like the teacher, I didn't do well. So I think it's important to have a relationship with your teacher, to be able to aspire to to better things, really. And in maths and technical drawing were my sort of favourite subjects, and maths, I was quite disappointed if I had less than 95% in a year in an exam. But I was there till I was 16, and did a school leavers certificate, and went on to do a pre-apprentice course at Llwynapia College of Further Education. At that time, I had no career ambitions, no kind of aspiration to do any particular job. So I just I came out of there when I was 16, not knowing what job to do next. And Dad had said, why don't you come and work in the printers and become a compositor? And I thought, well, why not? Just don't know what else to do. Well, I started my career working for W.T. Maddock & Co., which was what is termed as a letterpress printer. In these days, you don't really get printing done on letterpress or litho. It was classed at that stage in the 60s as an art. Printing was known as an art, whereas printing these days has become a technology. It was type was set on a hot metal casting machine known as monotype with a keyboard. And I really took an interest in the work that I was doing because it allowed me to sort of develop some design work into and put a lot of thought into layout and typography, and it helped my own confidence where I attended a day release school on one day a week down in Cardiff College of Art, had a printing section there. Where I sat City and Guilds and full tech certificate, and it gave me confidence in my own ability. Coming from the Rhondda and going down to the big city of Cardiff, you felt a little bit inferior to the city slickers, but I had nothing to fear because I've certainly built up a lot of confidence in that my ability as a printer and as a person was equal, if not better, to the people who were in the same class as me. But working in printing brought out a sort of like a sort of artistic flavour to my sort of personality, I suppose, because I did like design, I did like art, and doing typography and layout came naturally to me. But I didn't realise I had that kind of ability until I started working there. So just by chance, really. I did try for a job before I went into printing as an electrician with the SWELEC, South Wales Electricity Board. But I think I was 16 before I realised I was colourblind. And of course, it's no good being colourblind if you've got to put certain colour wires in different sockets and things. So I found out at an early stage that I wasn't cut out to be an electrician. I suppose in the years that I worked in Maddox, where I was in the company of my father for like 24/7 really. We work together, we live together, and it's obviously I probably have, and I don't know if I have, but I obviously feel that parts of Idris has rubbed off on me. I like to think that whatever I've done in my life, if I could do it, and I'm always sort of looking, would Idris be happy if I did this? What would Idris do here? Because as a mentor, and as somebody to look up to, he is a fantastic person. Right, stop there. Difficult because I get, I start to get upset a bit. Not upset, but it's difficult with Idris to put him in any kind of category because he wasn't a sort of a man's man who liked rugby or liked going down the pub. In a way, he was he loved his church and he loves doing putting on shows. He loved musicals. In some ways, he was quite effeminate in his ways and his outlook, and but he certainly wasn't effeminate in any other way other than perhaps his artistic way. He was a proper man who enjoyed the family and was respected by all the community. I don't think nobody would ever have a bad word to say about Idris because he got on well with so many different people in different walks of life, and he was a truly a people person, and he's obviously is a source of pride to Linda and me, really. He had some funny traits, like if you asked him if he liked something, he would never say, yeah, that's brilliant, or that's fantastic. He would always say, oh, that's quite nice. So we used to say, oh, well, it's only quite nice, is it, Dad? It's not really nice, it's just quite nice. as if he qualified everything with the word quite before when asked. Driving for Dad was always a chore. He hated it. As I said earlier, when he was 45, and he still drove as a learner driver for the rest of his life, really. And when he had the Ford Anglia, I remember being in the back seat and Edwina being in the front, and we were driving down through the Rhondda, through Wattsdown, coming into Anasir, and the car just suddenly faded out and stopped. And he just sat there. And Edwina said, "Well, go on then, Ed." He said, "What do you mean, go on then, Ed?" He said, "Well, go on, open up the lid." She said, "Well, why do I want to open up the lid?" Well, he says, "Because I haven't got a clue what's gone wrong." So he just sort of sat there with the bonnet closed, which he always used to call the lid. And he never understood cars, how they worked. And when he gave me one of his driving lessons up Llanwano, we used to go up on top of the mountain, see there was nobody around, and I used to swap over to the driver's seat, and he used to jump in the passenger seat, and I used to drive the car for about a mile, then we used to change over again. And he suddenly noticed this whirling sound coming from the engine, and he thought, "Oh, what have you done now, Norman? You've broken the car. What's that noise? What's that? You've broken the car." So he immediately took it down to Lockyer and PC, the local garage where he bought it. And the problem was fixed quite easily, that whilst I was going from the passenger seat to the driver's seat, my knee hipped a little switch that put the booster fan onto the heater, which made this whirring sound. But he was convinced that I'd broken the car. He was fixated by having his tyres checked once a week on a Saturday. So, but he couldn't, because he had bifocals. He couldn't read the scale on the handpiece on checking his tyre gauge on the tyre gauge. So he used to ask me to go down and do it with him. And on one occasion, I had to move the car to get to the back wheels. And I opened the door and went to move the car, and I didn't realise that he put his fingers on top of the door, and I closed the door, and he was banging on the window like this, banging on the window. I said, "What's the matter, Dad? What's the matter?" "You got it like this on the window." So I wound the window down. My fingers, he said, and I could see these blue things on the top of the door where he got his hand on top of the door. But I can't control myself when something like that happens. I just got to collapse laughing, because it is funny, really, even though he was in agony. But I've only once ever heard him swear and use the F word, and that was when he thought that I was going to crash the car when I was learning to drive, and I went round the bend too quickly. And he swore once, and he regretted it straight away, and we never spoke for about 10 minutes in that car. And then he said, "Sorry, son, sorry about that." I said, "That's okay, Dad." My dad, Idris, was never a confident driver, having learned to drive when he was like 45 and I was 15. But I couldn't wait to get behind the wheel and try my test and become a driver. I used to go out with Id in his car, Ford Anglia, then he changed it for an Austin 1100. We used to go up to Llanwano, up to Mardy Colliery roads, private roads, where I really got to learn clutch control, steering, braking, three-point turns. So even when I was like 15, 16, I was behind the wheel of the car. So I just counting down throughout my year when I was 16 to my 17th birthday in March, and I immediately put in for my test, and was rather disappointed after only driving 3 weeks to fail my first test on April the 1st, which is quite an omen, I suppose, really. But I had another test and I passed in May. So it wasn't long before I was able to get my driving license and become totally independent, really, and start going to pastures new, and started going over to Aberdare to Go-Go's Disco over the Aberdare Mountain, and you know. Well, because of the friendship that Dad had with my Uncle Tony, his son was called Kerry. Kerry was 10 months older than me, but we became great friends through our parents. Uncle Tony had a Standard 8 car. He used to take us to see Cardiff City play one week, Swansea Town the next. So, and because we were like 11 or 12 at the time, Kerry and I used to have a stool we used to carry with us to football matches, so we could stand on the stool in order to be able to see the play. It was great days, Swansea one week, Cardiff the next, because they were playing in the old second division, and that really led me to have a deep interest, and loved playing football. Went on to play when I was 16 for a team called Mardy United, where we won the Rhondda League for 2 years running, under 16. And then I played under 18, where we won the league again 2 years running, and really enjoyed playing football until I was 18. I didn't really continue after that because romance was in the air. That's when I met Jan. Met her in a disco, asked her out, and took her home, because by that time I was driving, sharing a car with Idris, his Austin 1100, and took her home. I had a few dates, and within a week or so we were really like really big mates. We could talk about anything. It seemed as if we knew each other all our lives, really. We were just like soulmates, and did everything together, saw each other about 4 times a week, and never broke up at all. Always hit it off. It also helped, I think, that I also hit it off with Jan's mum, Joan. Helped her with the dishes and stuff, and I got on equally as well with Jan's mother, Joan, as I did with Jan. Within a week, I was invited back to the house for Sunday tea, and met up with Joan and Arthur. She thought I was a lovely boy. Arthur didn't really know too much to start with. He thought, oh, I'm from the Rhondda, must be a bit rough, and a bit of a cheek saying that, coming from Aberdare himself, but there we go. Anyway, we got on really well, and we never proposed to each other. We just took it for granted we were going to get married, and I sort of had the hint that we were going to get married when Jan started looking in jewelers' windows for engagement rings. So we got engaged after about 4 years, no, 3 years probably, and we decided that when we get married, we would go for council accommodation because it was subsidised, and we got allocated a flat in or masonette or apartment in the new estate up at Penrhys. I remember going to the interview with the housing officer, and he asked us how long we'd be married. This was in about May, and we said, oh, well, we're not married yet. And he pulled the keys back. He said, what, you're not married? We can't let anybody who's not married have council accommodation. When do you propose to get married? And we'd set the day up to be September the 12th. He said, well, can you get married any sooner? So we said, yes, we could, and we brought the date forward to July the 24th, mainly to sort of make the council happy that they weren't letting it to sort of unmarried couple. Well, obviously the situation has completely changed now. Of course, it raised a lot of eyebrows at the wedding, because everybody knew we were getting married in September. So to bring the wedding forward to July, people jumped to the conclusion that we had a baby on the way. So it was quite funny, really. But we only lived up there for 6 months, up in Penrhys, Jan was working in the Polytechnic at the time. I was still working in Maddox, so it was quite a convenient place to live. In the meantime, I bought the car of my dreams and my passion, a brand new Triumph Spitfire, which was a bit of a letdown in a way, because what I was paying for the car, I didn't really have a lot of money over to run it. So we didn't really go all that far a distance in it. But it was a car that I always sort of had aspired to. We lived in Penrhys for about 6 months. It was costing us £5.12 and 6 a week, which included all the central heating and a garage. But within a short period of time, we realised it wasn't a very nice place to live. But all quite entertaining to see the Black Maria police cars turning up at the pub opposite every Saturday. Our neighbour in our block throwing his mother-in-law through a window, and trying to get our milk off the doorstep before the neighbour nicked it was a bit of a task sometimes. So I think, whilst it's supposed to have been a sort of an estate to encourage professionals to come and live there, they ended up moving problem families from Mardy and Trebanog there. And it became a bit of like the Wild West, really, being up on top of Penrhys. So we started looking around for a house then, a lot sooner than we anticipated. And at that time they were building Windermere Close on the Pinecroft Estate in Aberdare, in Cwmbach. So we went and had a look at the house and fancied one there, 3,200, £300 deposit and a mortgage over 25 years for £2,900. And I remember at the time, in order to qualify for the mortgage, I had to have a word with my employer to say that I was earning £28 a week. I was only earning 24 at the time, but I had £28. I had to earn £28 a week in order to qualify for the mortgage. And Arthur was very concerned about Jan and I tying ourselves with a mortgage round our neck, for £3,200. Of course, he'd never had a mortgage. He went back to live in his parents' house and inherited the house, as a lot of people do up in the valleys. The house passes to another generation, so mortgages was completely alien to him. Being born in 1949, 1950 is regarded these days as being in the lucky generation. And I think the reason for that is financial, in a sense that we were able to very quickly aspire to the homes that our parents lived in. Our first house we bought was £3,200 for a 3-bedroom semi. That house now is probably worth £300,000. But it was easy to get on the property ladder. It was also an advantage that we experienced in the early 60s, the birth of popular music as we now know it. The Beatles came along in 1963. Other pop bands like the Rolling Stones, Billy J. Kramer, and the Dakotas, Jerry and the Pacemakers. All these bands really set up a new generation in music. It was fantastic, really, going to see these bands. Went to see the Beatles down in Bournemouth in '65. Saw the Rolling Stones in the Capitol Cinema. Going to dances when I was 15, 16 in the Embassy Ballroom in Ferndale. Was a fantastic time, really, with new music coming out and new stars every week, really. I worked in Maddox for 8 years. I served a 5-year apprenticeship, and by the time I got to 24, I probably realised that my future didn't lie following in Dad's footsteps, who'd been working there for 50 years. I felt that I needed to go and work in pastures new. A job came up with Celtic Press, who were just converting from hot metal over to film composition. and they were looking for people with keyboard skills, QWERTY keyboard skills, to type all the newspaper stories, which was converted into film. It wasn't a job I enjoyed. It was a job I did because by that time I had a mortgage to pay. We'd bought a house in Aberdare. I was married, so I had responsibilities. I was very happy to receive a call from the principal of the School of Print asking me would I like to go for an interview with an advertising agency, Seal Publicity. They were looking for somebody with print experience and knowledge to work as a production executive in Cardiff. So, I went down for this job, not having any great ambition to do this particular job. But it was something that appealed to me because it got me from doing a manual job into a management job. And it certainly opened my eyes to the big world out there, where I used to go up to, photographic shoots up in London, meet people like Mary Quant, do film work and advertising work for Mannequin Cigars, Bang & Olufsen television production of advertisements, and it was so varied really, and I really enjoyed it. And one of the clients that we had was the South Wales Buying Company based in Tonopandi, and I very quickly was producing all their print work, brochures, point of sale, and became quite close. I became like another member of their staff, and within a period of time, I got offered a job to go and work with them full time. So I came in as marketing manager, and I was naturally dressed as a marketing manager would do, with a shirt and tie and suit or jacket. And I went down onto the factory floor after about a week, and I spoke to a lady called Moira and asked Moira, has she got any magnolia slatting? I wanted a sample. So Moira said, well, no, she said, we haven't got any of that. She said, we're out of magnolia. And I said to Moira, yes, you have. I said, there's a piece over by there. She said, over by there? Where are you from then? I said, well, I was born in Llanfair Hospital. So at that moment, the penny dropped that I wasn't English because I had a tie on, but I was Welsh. And she shouted, hey, girls, he's one of us. So I immediately was accepted as one of them from an early stage, really. Well, I think throughout my career, really, I've never tried to get away from it. I've never tried to talk like posh or disguise it in any way, because in a way, your accent and the way you speak is your signature, isn't it? I've had nothing to apologise for being Welsh, and it's nice to think that you can go on the phone to people and you can say to somebody, "Hiya Sue, how are you today?" and they know immediately who you are. You know what I mean? Because it's your signature, isn't it? Moving to Penturk, where we've lived for the last 40 years, wasn't a decision that we made because we liked the area or this is somewhere where we wanted to live. It was really down to saving a £50 deposit, which sounds crazy now. But we bought the house up in Hynham in Gloucester with the aim of moving up there and living up in the Cotswolds. It was when we decided to stay in South Wales that we asked Bovis, are they building similar houses in South Wales? And we had a choice of either Penturk or Pentwyn. And Pentwyn we went to see, which was a horrible estate out in Llanedin Way. We didn't really fancy that at all. We couldn't afford the most expensive houses, and there was one house available on that particular phase, which happened to be number 13 Pant Glass. So we transferred the money and we bought pant glass. Now I was still working in Cheltenham at the time, working out my notice, and I had a call one day from Adrian, my brother-in-law, to say that he'd been up there to look at the houses, and he thought they were really nice houses. Somebody had dropped out of a house and the one had become available, number 14, next door. And he said, would we have any objections to if he moved in next door? Well, what can you say? I mean, I didn't have any objections. But when I mentioned it to Jan, she was devastated, really, to think that her sister-in-law and brother-in-law were going to live next door. Not as if we don't get on or anything, but I think in practice it's worked out really well, because we've got 2 children, and Linda and Adrian got 2 children, and they've grown up really close. Zoe is more like a brother to Owen, and Amy and Laura are quite close in age, and they've grown up like sisters, really. So we've had a close family tie over the years, and it's worked out great as far as babysitters are concerned, because Mum and Dad used to come down and stay over, and it meant that Ed used to come in one house and Edwina go in the other house. So we had ready-made babysitters on call, really. Well, they always say, there's a saying like new home, new baby. And we'd been married now for nearly 9 years, and we felt that moving to Penturk, into a 4-bedroom house, the time was right. Even though if you try to justify it economically, you never have kids, because it effectively means that you're losing one income. But we felt that if we didn't do it when we did, if we didn't have children when we were now 30, that it would probably never happen. So it didn't take long for Janet to become pregnant. And I think the pregnancy went really well. I don't think Jan suffered too much. I certainly didn't. It was okay for me. But when the moment came for Jan to give birth, she'd had pains during the night, and they gradually got more and more frequent. Phoned the hospital, and they suggested you should come in. So we left home about 9 o'clock, of course, which is a bad time to leave Penturk at any day of the week. But at 9 o'clock is lots of traffic going into town, and we had to get to the Heath Hospital. And we got there about 9:20, went up to the ward, and pains were coming very regularly. Pregnancy was developing and giving birth. I struck up a friendship with somebody else, another bloke who was in the same situation. His was carrying on quite a while as well, so we went out for lunch together. We went down the cafe, and we had lunch, came back, the wives were still there, giving birth. So we stayed around for a while, and Owen came at about 20 to 5. So it was a full day affair, really, Owen being born. And it meant that, I just had enough time to ring up the office and ring around, tell people that I had a son, and, it was quite a moment, really. Very difficult to describe, becoming a father. It doesn't really hit you, I suppose, immediately. It was different, really, having Laura, because we went through the same sort of time schedule of Jan going into labour at about 9 o'clock. I thought, got all this sorted now, put a day aside for the birth. Rung up saying, I'm not coming in today, Jan's giving birth today. Left home at 9 o'clock, hit traffic again, and it was getting quite embarrassing, really, because Jan was sitting in the front seat saying, she's coming, I want to push. I was saying, don't be so silly, John. We got plenty of time yet, you know. It can't be that bad. Yeah, she said she'd definitely come in. She said, and she wanted to push. Well, I parked outside the maternity, got to the maternity hospital, parked outside. She couldn't walk in. We had to get a porter to get a wheelchair. I felt, so embarrassed what a fuss she's making. And, you know, we went up into the ward and she couldn't get her knickers off quick enough in order to get on the bed. And it was quite shocking that Laura was born 20 minutes later, at about 9:20, which was incredibly quick, really. You know, and it ruined my day in a way because I had the whole day booked off. I didn't know what to do now. Should I go in the office or should I stay off? But I just I just stayed off work and enjoyed the experience, really. But it's terrific, you know, to have see your children born, and it just hits it off. It hits you really what women have to go through. In terms of the pain barrier, it does make your eyes water, really, as a bloke. When it comes down to selecting a name, I think it's important to give that child a name that is not going to be an embarrassment to them throughout their life, something they've got to live with. We always liked the name Owen, not Owain, Owen. You know, he does get called Owain now and again by the Welsh contingent, but it's spelled O-W-E-N. And it was quite natural for us to settle on Lloyd as a middle name, because it was my middle name, it was Idris's middle name, and it was Lily Lloyd's maiden name, and it was the surname of the Owen's great grandparent, or great great grandparent actually. So Owen's name came quite easily, and we always liked Laura. We always liked Laura as a name for a young lady, for a baby, and Jan always liked the name Helen. So Laura Helen came quite naturally. I don't know if we would have had a third child, what we would have called it, but we didn't think about names any further, because when Owen was born, he was quite a special baby. Not only was he our first, he was the first grandson for both sets of grandparents, and he had in our side of the family, he had 4 years of being the only child in the family. But he had terrific times with his grandparents, and he had spent some really quality time with them before other grandchildren came along. And I think there's special memories that he would have with his grandfathers in particular, I think, where he used to go up the park or go over the woods and go for different walks. And he was a good boy, you know. We never really had any problems with him. Our holidays at that time was camping, and which progressed to caravanning. And Owen always liked to play like practical jokes on. He thought that was quite amusing, and most of the time it was. But there was an occasion where we were going to have a cup of tea, and Jan had put the cups ready and put milk in the cups, white cups. And I think I'd been out getting some more water. I came to the door of the caravan, and Owen picked up the 2 cups, and he sort of felt he went to throw whatever the contents was over me. He didn't realise there was milk in the cups, and he threw these 2 cups of milk over me. I was dripping right from my head, and it's amazing how much milk, how much mess it can make. And he must have seen the look of surprise on my face, which was quite amusing when I think back, because I think he was even more surprised than I was. And of course, he had nowhere to run. He was just stuck in the caravan. And he was waiting for some kind of show of anger from me, that I was dripping with milk after he'd thrown it over me. But it was quite a amusing time, really, one that often we reflect on. Laura was, the moment I think of with Laura is that when Jan was going to take both the kids swimming one day, and she got all the bags ready and they were all ready to go. Owen was very excited about going swimming. But Jan noticed on one of the table lamps there was like somebody had written on it with a felt tip pen. And she knew it was Laura because she always used to write in swirls, like little circles. So she called both the kids in, said, Owen, Laura, who's done this on the lampshade? And Owen said, I didn't do it, ma'am. And Laura said, Owen did it, ma'am. And she knew it wasn't Owen, but she said, Owen did it, ma'am. And he said, look, Jan said, I'd like you to think about this, she said. Before we go swimming, I want the truth before we go swimming. We're not going swimming until you tell the truth. Now go and have a word. So Owen and Laura went out in the hall. Owen had a word with her. And she said, look, Laura, you've got to tell your mother the truth now before we go out. So they came back in and Jan said, right, who did this on the lampshade? And Laura said, Owen did it, mum. Again. Well, Owen was exasperated. He was speechless. He didn't know what to say, other than sort of wring his sister's neck. But it was quite funny how she stuck to her story, even though she was telling the fibs. Yeah, when I look back on my life and think of what I accomplished, in my own mind, I am really accomplished a lot. But it depends on how you measure accomplishments. If it's academically, I'm pretty average. Didn't go to grammar school, didn't go to university, didn't have a degree. But I believe that what I've accomplished in life is a solid base for the family. I've always had employment. I've always lived a stable life. I've been very, very lucky to have a partner like I've had with Jan. We both see eye to eye most of the time, although we do bicker a lot, but we never argue about anything. We do bicker, and I must admit I do like and I do generate the bickering quite a lot by playing her up sometimes. But that's something we do together, and she does it to me as well. She knows how to wind me up, and it's part of life, and it makes life interesting. It would be really boring if we didn't have that kind of sort of spark really with each other. And but we get to a stage where you know what each other's thinking. You know, we could be driving along in a car and I'd come out with some really random comment, totally out of context, but she would know, Jan would know what I'm talking about, because she knows the way I think and what's going on in my mind, which is a bit disconcerting sometimes, that your partner knows what's going on in your mind without actually saying anything. But you know, it's a bit like you be able to read a person, I think, is important, and we can read each other pretty well, and you know, we've been good mates, lovers and partners for like 50 years now, and it obviously works for us, you know. And I think back of the people where marriage and relationships haven't worked out so well, but I think from my own point of view, I don't think I ever fall out with anybody. I've never have arguments about people, never stop talking to people, which is a really childish thing to do. So in a way, I think, I like to think that I'm as good at relationships as Idris was, who, you know, had who respected everybody and spoke to everybody and never fell out with them, and built up a terrific sort of circle of friends that perhaps sort of individually as a person you perhaps don't appreciate, you just accept it. But I think having that broad base of friendships and helps you get through life, and is something that is a sort of an accomplishment, I suppose. I think as you go through life and your life progresses and people around you change, your grandparents die, and then your parents die, and then suddenly you think, wow, you know, I'm 70 now. I'm next to die. I'm top of the ladder now. I'm going to be the next one to fall off, and that's a really strange feeling, because I don't feel any different now to what I did when I was in my 20s, in terms of my brain and what I like to do, and the way I look at life. I don't feel suddenly, as I say on television, an elderly 70-year-old pensioner. You know, it makes people sound really, really old, and I don't really feel that. I don't feel any older than I was when I had grandparents and parents living. Yeah, I think the incredible thing is, as you grow older, I can't believe that I'm 70 and I got a 40-year-old son and a 10-year-old grandson. I think, well, you know, how did that happen? You know, because in your head you just feel as if you did when you were 20 or 30. You know, I'd love to go out and have a game of football again. You know, the mind doesn't grow old in the same rate as the body does, and I really feel that it's worth trying to maintain your youth in your head, even if you can't do it in your body, as long as you can. You know, I used to have people working for me, and they used to say, oh, I can't do things now as I used to, now not at my age. And I used to say, well, how old are you? And they say, well, I'm going to be 50 next year. And I think, bloody hell, you know, 50 next year, and you suddenly feeling that you're growing old. I think growing old is a state of mind, and if you think old, you're going to get old, whereas you have to maintain your youth by thinking young and doing things when you can, as long as you can. And you know, the big factor that you have to appreciate is that having sons and having grandchildren, you know, you have to relate to them, and you have to do things that excite them as well as excite you. Not to sit there like an old fart and you know, just let them carry on and play around you. Although sometimes you do feel like doing that, certainly if you've got a glass of beer in your hand. But it's fantastic, I think, to be able to look back at the family and your parents and your grandparents, and knowing what a kind of foundation that they give you as a family. You know, having your grandparents, your parents, as sort of like mentors for you for your life, really, and that's a big influence on me, as is Id and Ed. You know, when I do things in my life now, I think, well, what would Id and Ed do? And you know, if I could live a life like Id and Ed did, I won't be going far wrong.